another. You can imagine it, but basically you're going to get really silly answers from this oracle. You have to figure out what that meant. Well, Hierophant comes back to Socrates and he says he asked the god, because she's the spokesperson for the god, Apollo, who's the wisest? And she said, no one is wiser than Socrates. And Socrates thought, wait a minute, there's no way. He might have even used the F word, I don't know. But in any case, there's no way. And so he set out to prove the god was wrong by going around and asking all the famous people who were known to be wise, questions. Find out who's the wisest. Figuring I'll find someone who's wiser than I am, and then I'll go back and tell the god, hey, you said I was the wisest, and I found so and so, and he's clearly much wiser than me. So what do you say to that? Basic, right? The end of the story was he asked, these wise people, the teachers, the sophists, the artists, and so on, all these things, and what he discovered is that they all think they're wise, but none of them are really wise. I know that I'm not wise, so actually I'm wiser than they are. Because I know that I don't know anything, right? This is a Socratic, paradox in a way, right? He's wiser because he knows he doesn't know anything. What of course happens is he pisses everybody off because he demonstrates in a discussion with a bunch of people at rich people's houses where they have all these dialogues, these symposia, right? And they're all sitting around having wine, having a good time, discussing things like what is love, what is justice, etc. And remember the argument that Eric Havelock gave us in his book, The Muse Learns to Write, that while you're teaching everyone through poems, through poetry like the Iliad, the Odyssey, and others, the Works and Days, and so on. There's other ones, right, that are out there. The poem describes a story, just as an oral tradition would explain something. But it doesn't get into detail explaining what love is or what courage is and so on. You just kind of get it from the context of the poem. But once you're starting to write in prose, it seems that now you're faced with the dilemma of explaining, well, what is love? What is courage? What are all these different virtues? And remember, when we go back to the Iliad and Achilles is their hero, you think, that's like Conan the Barbarian. He's just a hero because he could do whatever he wants, right? But now when they're starting to define these virtues, they're going to come up with a whole set of different virtues. That's, of course, virtues that we still think of as virtues, right? Was Socrates guilty? Was he guilty of corrupting the youth? Was it illegal for us to say yes? As far as the time was concerned, he was found guilty, although the vote was close. It was something like 30? There was 500 people voting. Plato was actually one of the ones in the jury of 500. He's mentioned by name, right? And so it's actually surprising, because if he hadn't been found guilty, the punishment was given to the people that were the prosecution. It's interesting. Imagine if that was part of our law today, how many prosecutions would happen? If you can't prove it, then we kill you instead. Yeah. So you end up with a close call, actually. But it seems pretty clear that the majority, of course, did think he was guilty of corrupting the youth by teaching them wisdom, essentially. Parents didn't really want their kids learning to be critical thinkers. One of the people that hang out with Socrates, and by the way, Socrates I think means all power. Socrates, right? So all the power, like a democrates, right? Means the deme, the people have the power, right? Aristocracy, the best have all the power, right? The aristocrats, right? Etc. But Socrates, in dialoguing with all of these people, would ask them a question, and it was pretty interesting how he went about it, because he would ask them a definition of something. So, for example, in let's see, where is aha? There we go. So let's step out of the apology for a minute. Go up here. Notice on this site, all of the works by Plato are there, and I'm going to go to the Euthyphro for a minute. I think I mentioned last class that Euthyphro literally means EU is good, right? So like eudaimonia, for example, means the good demon. When we talk about Aristotle, his goal for ethics is eudaimonia. The feeling of exuberance or fulfillment, or whatever you want to translate eudaimonia as, is the goal of our ethical life, right? But EU means good, right? Euthanasia, another example, a good death, right? But eutheo is God, and phro is phronesis, or analysis. So it's good God analysis. Euthyphro is a priest. He's a specialist on the gods. And they're waiting in line together for Socrates' trial. And Euthyphro is there because he wants to prosecute his father for killing one of his own slaves. That's why he's there. So they start a discussion, and Socrates says to him, I'm going to be charged with impiety. And since you're a specialist on the gods, I thought while we're waiting, you could teach me what piety is. That way, at least when I go in there, I can say, I know I'm an old dumb man, and I've made mistakes and so on, but I'm studying what piety is with Euthyphro, who's going to teach me, so I won't make the same mistakes. So Euthyphro said, of course I'll have. Right? So Socrates asked him, well, okay, so what is piety? And Euthyphro answers, doing what the gods love. Sounds pretty good, right? Doing what the gods love. While I was watching the interviews yesterday, I was thinking what they really want to ask Bondi and Hegseth, is, if does Trump love the pious because it's so pious, or is the pious pious because Trump loves it? This is essentially what he ends up asking Euthyphro. Initially, Euthyphro says, doing what the gods love. But that's a problem, right? I mean, if you do what Zeus loves, and you're a guy, you're supposed to be fooling around out there. But if you're Hera, and you want to do what Hera loves, you're going to remain, monogamous, etc. Right? So basically, different gods require you to do different things. So that's a real problem for the Greeks, where you've got a whole pantheon, right? Pan means all, and theon, all the gods, right? So pantheon, you've got all these gods. They all like different things. Bacchus, Dionysius loves alcohol and drinking wine and having a good time. And in fact, a lot of the bacchanalia or the celebrations for Dionysius are orgiastic, right? Everybody having all kinds of fun, for the whole week of celebration, right? On the other hand, you've got Apollo, who's reason, right? So you've got different gods, different ways of being pious. So how can you be pious to all of them when you end up in conflict with the others, when you're being pious, etc., etc.? So Socrates asks Euthyphro, well, this question, is the pious pious because the gods love it? Or do the gods love the pious because it's so pious? And Euthyphro gets upset and goes away. Gives up. Right? Furious, because this sounds like a crazy question. But if you think about it, what does it really mean to ask that question? Remember, the priests are usually saying what their intuition has told them the gods love. And where do they get that intuition? Remember, they might get it from Julian Jaynes' book. Did I mention that? Not from the book, but what Julian Jaynes argues. Basically, what Julian Jaynes argues in this book is that at a certain point, it seems human beings started having a connection between the two sides, the bicameral, two rooms, right? Right? Camera means room. Bicameral, you have two cameras, two sides, right? The breakdown of the bicameral mind. We started hearing ourselves think. This is his thesis, right? And as we did that, certain individuals hearing themselves think thought that they were hearing voices. Now, of course, a lot of people actually do hear voices. You see them, you're in Anchorage, right? Maybe you hear voices. Actually, I can talk with my parents and so on. They're dead, but I feel like I have conversations with them and so on. I play golf. My dad's always telling me, "Good shot." Or it might be the program. I don't know. But that could have been funnier than it was. Well, never do that joke again. But in any case, you've got the idea that these people are hearing voices. They don't know where the voice is coming from. Could be from a burning bush. Who the heck knows? But basically they think this is the gods talking to me and telling me what I ought to do or what I ought to believe. Socrates himself, in saying that the gods has restrained him from doing certain things, is kind of suggesting that he's got this same kind of insight, and that he thinks the God doesn't tell him what to do but tells him what not to do. For Socrates. But if you think about it, all these people are basically tuned to their thoughts and thinking that that's what the gods are telling them to do. So, arguably, at this time period, the priesthood class believes that they know what the gods expect of people through what we would now today call our consciousness, right? We have a conscious belief in something. And I think some of us do think that is, our consciousness is coming direct from God, right? Well, they probably did. And the question that Socrates is asking is that good enough? Is that really what God wants us to do? Or can we think up something more rational? In other words, if we collectively try to reason about what we ought to do, would we come up with a better idea than what our intuition is telling us that we think are coming from the gods? In other words, we should doubt the gods. So he is guilty. He is guilty. Verse